Good evening, and thank you for coming out on such a beautiful evening. I'm thrilled to welcome those of you in the hall, and we have a very large, still virtual audience who's streaming with us at home. So thank you for joining us on our Made Local series to celebrate the Pittsburgh launch of Are the Arts Essential? With co-editor Alberta Arthurs and contributors Dr. Cristal Truscott and Jeffrey Brown. Let's clap for them. Guys, you guys are small and mighty, or small in number. Hello, I'm Stephanie Flom, Executive Director of Pittsburgh Arts and Lectures. On behalf of Pittsburgh Arts and Lectures and our co-presenter, the Heinz Endowments, again, welcome. Made Local is presented in partnership with the wonderful Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, to whom we are sincerely grateful. Thank you to the John Bradimus Center of New York University for their support. A shout out to White Whale Bookstore, who's here with the signed copies of Are the Arts Essential? The book, you can see it, it is as visually stunning as it is essential reading. Believe me, you are going to want to have one. Please join us on Saturday at the Greater Pittsburgh Festival of Books Poetry Tent, and next Wednesday we'll be back here when we present Tuan Das, a Bengali poet and activist with his new book, Exile Poems. We're thrilled that we've just announced our 2022-23 10-evening season. You can find details on our website where subscriptions are available. Introducing our participants is Janet Sarba. Janet is Vice President of Creativity at the Heinz Endowments. She is a visionary leader who has continuously spearheaded strategies so that arts and culture in Pittsburgh and funding for arts and culture in Pittsburgh is continually evolving as we, the arts community, strive to be responsive, relevant, creative, and just. Janet believes in the power of the arts and works tirelessly to ensure that, yes, they are and will remain essential. Please welcome Janet Sarba. Janet?
Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you, intrepid friends, for coming out on this beautiful day, and thank you so much for all the people who are watching virtually to come for this discussion of this wonderful book of essays. So in a perfect world, are the arts essential would be a rhetorical question every day, all the time, for everyone. But as most of us are here today because we believe that in our very core. But it goes without saying that we're not in a perfect world, that is why reading these essays is a little like finding water in the desert for me. Because in the transactional, divisive, and short attention span world that we live in now, it's a real tonic to actually get immersed in the issues and perspectives that come alive in this book. Just to savor and reflect on the roles that the arts should and do play in the world. Made me want to say, okay, there's 25 essays in this book. Let's just discuss one a week for 25 weeks, and then let's just keep going with other material after that. And let's continue to fight indifference about the importance of the arts and become powerfully conversant about why they are important in the world. I had the great good fortune of being a participant in one of the convenings at the Picantico Center of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund that spawned this book. It was a real revelation, and I salute the many minds and voices that led to this work and the work of the folks at the Bradimus Center and NYU who brought it to fruition as well. We are really fortunate tonight to have two of the essayists in the book with us. Dr. Cristal Truscott is a playwright, director, a culture worker, scholar, educator, and the founding artistic director of Progress Theater. She's an associate professor of performance studies and graduate acting at Northwestern University. To learn more about her work and how she combines these multiple roles, I suggest that you visit her website to understand her soul work methodology. You'll be very rewarded if you take the time to do that. And Jeffrey Brown is senior correspondent and chief arts correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, public television's national nightly newscast. His reporting has garnered Emmy, Peabody, and other awards and honors, and his book of poems, titled The News, was published in 2015. And the moderator of tonight's event is Dr. Alberta Arthurs. You may have wondered, how is this night's event in the Made Local series? And the answer is that we in Pittsburgh get to claim Alberta Arthurs as one of our own. She was president of Chatham College, now University, from 1977 to 1982, and following that, she was director for arts and humanities at the Rockefeller Foundation, and is currently now a senior fellow of the Bradamus Center at New York University. I had the chance to work with Alberta at Chatham, and she changed my life, and I am only one of many, many people for whom that is the case. So I'm excited to have the chance to introduce her. I leave you in her more than capable hands for the remainder of the evening as speaker and moderator, and Alberta's going to join us to tell us about the genesis of the book and then engage in conversation with our two guests. Please welcome Dr. Alberta Arthurs. Yay.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Janet. Delighted to be back in Pittsburgh. I can't tell you how hard it was to leave this city when I did those many years ago. I was president of Chatham for 5 years, and it was a wonderful place then, and it is now. And Pittsburgh was a wonderful place then, and it is now. It's really a treat to be presented as a Pittsburgher to this crowd. I've never quite stopped being one, and my family was so mad at me when we left. I want to welcome all of you to who are in this room, and all of you who are participating in Zoom. It's nice to be back in rooms and not only on Zooms. And it makes it very, very special to be here. And to talk about Are the Arts Essential? I'd like to start by, again, thanking Stephanie Flom of the Pittsburgh Arts and Lectures and her staff, and Janet of Heinz for bringing us together tonight. And I also want to thank my NYU colleagues and collaborators on this book, from its inception to now. Two of them are with me here in Pittsburgh, Michael Denisha and Tom McIntyre of the John Bradamus Center of New York University. The book has been harbored, as I like to say, as few books have ever been, by the Bradamus Center's interest in it, and my gratitude to the university and to my colleagues there is unending. About the book, first of all, Are the Arts Essential is not, as I like to say, a rhetorical question. It is a real question, and the prod that became the book. It was the question that was actually asked of those we invited to contribute to the book. The question that was asked and answered by the 27 brilliant people who responded to the question and who became the book. It's, we all, of course, appreciate the arts. We appreciate the stimulation, the excitement, and the challenges that the arts give us when we participate in them, when we go to a play or enjoy the movement of poetry and dance, the appeal of the visual arts. But art moves us beyond the day. It moves us beyond the day by day. This book, however, asks the question in a different way. The assumption behind the question is that people who make or manage or mount the arts are seldom asked why they do it, what they hope for, what they intend, what motivates them, and what they aspire to as they perform and write and make music. I am moved emotionally, most of us are, and moved to action, actually, by the writings that came back to ensure the publication of this book. Each answer to the question, are the arts essential? Each essay or each conversation that came back to us elicited a profound response. Each one of the contributions, the conversations, mostly essays that we got, each one of them is deep, dramatic, and demanding of us as citizens. As citizens, we are asked by Mary Miss to see the roles that the visual arts can play in making the environment and its degradation visible to people. Jesse Rosen of the League of American Orchestras and Dan Weiss, the head of the Metropolitan Museum in New York, asked us to think with them about what major institutions in this country, like museums and orchestras, can do and must do to confront the issues of the time. Darren Walker of the Ford Foundation tells us how art addresses and activates response to social justice in this country. Tanya Leone, a prize-winning composer, shows the values and the value of immigrant and refugee Americans. Karen Ishikura shows us how the arts fill a cavity, an emptiness, in fact, an incarceration, and tells us the story of the Japanese internment camps and the ways in which their prisoners used the arts to survive. This evening, we will hear directly from two contributors to Are the Arts Essential? Each of them probes the offerings of the arts, and each of them sounds an alert. The book offers 26 such examples of the essentiality of the arts to our lives and to our times. Its message, put most simply, is take action through the arts. Or better yet, as Anthony Impaya, one of the contributors to the book, has written, imagination teaches us how to respond to unimaginary events. And that's really the measure of the book, in a sentence. In a sentence. I've been struck by the relevance of art and argument in this book in the actualities of our own time. We are all thinking about the Ukraine and about President Zelensky, who fights for his people, for his country, for democracy. Zelensky moves us He moves nations. History is happening. In Are the Arts Essential, Richard Sennett, a superb sociologist, offers an essay that is precisely about this, called Darkness and Light, the Power of Performing. Professor Sennett cites the play scene in Hamlet in which art reveals reality. And he reminds us of the performances, the speeches, the parades, the films that propelled the rise of Hitler. Sennett writes about the power of performance for good and for evil in human affairs, in history. President Zelensky is an actor, he is a narrator, he is a storyteller who tells us the story in real time that is the history, his history, and ours as well. That telling is the stage we are on with him. We share with each other and with Ukraine history as it happens in the theater of war, in the tragedy of a nation, through the performance of a key actor in it. History and art have heroes and villains, both do. History happens, art reveals. Art is the entry into a home for, an explicator of, an instigator of our realities, our histories. That is, by one measure or two, the history of the publication, the history of the arts as we can receive them, look at them, and use them as citizens of the world. I'm proud and happy to introduce two of our writers who will engage with me in a conversation about the essentiality of the arts. And thank you again for being with us. And our writers who have already been introduced to you are, I think, about to join us. Cristal and Jeff, would you join me? A small apology. I had much more difficulty seeing than I expected to at the podium, so I hope everything came through clearly to you as I struggled to remind myself of my notes as I was attempting to read them. But now there are three of us, and I hope you can hear me well, and all of us well. And I'm gonna start with a question. There will be four of these questions, which we hope will enlist us in conversation and speak to the issues in the book in personal ways. So let me get started with the very first of the questions, and I'm addressing them to the two of you, and I hope you're prepared to tell us a little about your work and what compels you to pursue it.
Yes. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Hello. Hi. You know, this is my first time in Pittsburgh. I'm coming here from Houston, Texas, and so often when I visit places outside of the South, I say, I offer the Southern greeting of good evening, and I would expect the Southern response of good evening in return. So I know everyone's massing the space, but can we do a little call and response? Good evening.
Good evening.
All right, thank you. So my name is Cristal Chanel Truscott, and I am a playwright and a director. My ensemble company, Progress Theater, has a mission to connect people around social consciousness, cross-community understanding, and anti-racism. And I'm also an educator. I teach a methodology called soul work that's rooted in generations-old African-American performance traditions to train actors, directors, really artists of any discipline, and also PhD students who use soul work as an analytical tool to think about and investigate performance and culture. And I'm also a performance studies scholar. So I study and research and make performance as a way of understanding culture and history and sociocultural movements. So that's a little about me and my work.
Thank you, Cristal. Jeff?
Well, hello, everyone. This is not my first time in Pittsburgh, but it's a pleasure to be back here. I've been coming for many years, off and on, watching developments here, and been able, actually, fortunately, to do a number of really interesting stories here over the years. I am a journalist on a nightly news program for many, many years, and that is the basic fact from which I approach the kind of topics we're going to be talking about tonight. We gather every morning and we think about what's happening in the world and what can we do on a program to portray that, capture that, show that. We have to make decisions every day. It's a kind of weird thing, editorial decisions about, oh, you know, what's most important, but also what makes for an interesting program. Of all of the things happening at any given moment, what do we want to tackle? So I have been doing that for a long time in a traditional news setting where most of us can kind of agree on the kinds of things that belong in a newscast because we're all familiar with it. And you know what those are, and we're watching those every day, international stories and politics and a whole host of things. The reason I'm here with you now, and what I've been trying to do over the last many years, but especially in the last 5, 7 years exclusively, as full-time as I can, is focus on arts and culture because of my very strong feeling that that is part of what's going on in our world. And that we should not be treating it as something over here on the side or something that we could get to if we can get to it. And I've been in a very fortunate position of working at a place where that is valued as part of the news and being able to, at different times over the years in different ways and more or less, depending on what's going on in the world, but with a real commitment at our program to featuring arts and culture as part of the news. I mean, I will keep emphasizing that over and over again tonight, and it's sort of what I was writing about and wanted, as part of this project, that this is not something that's separate. This, to me, is something that is just as much part of the news as, and I have, done it all pretty much. I was not the one who got to interview the presidents because that was always reserved for my, fearless leaders like Jim Lair, but I've interviewed pretty much everybody else, secretaries of this or that, or senators or generals or corporate leaders or experts on every possible topic there is. To me, when I'm sitting down with a writer or a creator of any kind, I approach that in the exact same way. I want to treat them in the exact same way with the same respect because that's who they are in telling me something about the world. So that's a little bit of who I am.
I think we sense without any trouble at all the kind of passion that each of you brings to your work in the arts. And the second question I would pose to you is, given where you are in your life work, why did you want to be a part of this book? Jeff, you want to go first?
We'll trade going first here. Well, I mean, partly the short answer is you asked me.
No.
and I've known you a long time, no, look, I mean, I thought it was, a hugely important project. I mean, first of all, Alberta asked me, and I knew that meant, and I could quickly see that there were a lot of interesting people involved. So I was very pleased, of course, to be part of the group. And it is a fascinating group of active artists and thinkers and practitioners from many different areas, and people who come at this from a lot of different areas. So I was, pleased and sort of tickled to be asked to be part of this as someone who's approaching it as interested in the arts, as I say, as part of the news, and presenting it and trying to bring it to a large general audience. So that was important to me. And then, of course, most important is the question itself: are the arts essential? I mean, I think we all kind of laughed that you put a question mark there. I mean, everybody involved. There was no debate about the answer to that, right? So the question becomes not are the arts essential, but in what ways are the arts essential, and how do we define that? How does that impact our own individual lives? And even more interesting in what came out in the various essays and talks is in our professional lives and the way we're trying to reach people. So I was immediately, drawn to it for all kinds of reasons. It also happened that, I do a fair amount of speaking about these things because I'm asked to, because I am doing this in a public way. And so it's always on my mind, to do the work. The work is what I do on a day-to-day basis, and I don't think that much about it because I guess I internalized it 30 years ago. This is what I'm doing. But it is interesting to be asked to kind of explain it, and I almost have to explain it to myself and stop and think about, well, what is the purpose of this, and what is the value of this, and why this and why not that? I'm always asked, why'd you pick that story? How do you pick stories? I mean, there's value judgments in these things, and so every time I'm asked to give a talk, or in this case to sit and write about this, it becomes an interesting sort of personal challenge to give it some thought about why exactly I'm doing it and what value I think it might have. So it was useful in that sense too.
But Jeff, one of the reasons it's so important to have your voice on the air and in print in this instance is because you are telling us something about the arts that we are seldom told, which is that it is essential to our understanding of the world within which we live. That the news, as it's called, and the arts, as we know them, are not separate entities. They're integrated in terms of what we can learn, what we know, what we understand, how we can advance the circumstances that surround us.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, but I mean, when I think of the people I interact with, I mean, I think that's what they're doing as well. Whether they're educators or they are the artists themselves, they are implicitly or explicitly, in some cases, saying that this is an important thing that I or the person does, that I want to communicate and share with you, and that connects us all as people, sometimes as family members or community members, or as fellow citizens. So I appreciate you saying that I do that in one public way, but I don't think it's all that different from what I see artists doing and scholars doing in academia, teachers, in public education, God bless them, who are trying to do this, and people performing, arts organizations. I travel all over the country and parts of the world, and I see people in many different walks of life doing that exact thing. And again, it may be more implicit than the way I'm putting it tonight, to say that art is part of our life, but that's in essence what I think they're all saying.
Tying the arts to the news every night for all to see and hear is a contribution that's not usual, which is one reason that you needed to be in the book. And Cristal brings her own very special reasons for having agreed, I think, to be part of this book.
Sure. I mean, I share a reason with Jeffrey, which is just the invitation, and that, because I'd engaged with you and Michael and Tom at the Bradman Center and really gotten to see that there is action behind, the theories and the philosophies and the things that are being explored in this book. I mean, to me, I'm always thinking about how the things that we read about or write about exist in embodied practice and exist when people share space. And so this practice of gathering people and being able to be in the room for those conversations was really inspiring for me, and I think for others that contributed to the book. I remember at one of the first gatherings, having a chuckle with another contributor that, that we just assumed that the question, are the arts essential, was rhetorical, so that our essays need only to say, are they essential? And that's it, right? That of course, what more, what more needs to be said? But I think the other reason at this moment in my work life that it was compelling for me is that I, more often than not, refer to myself as a culture worker. I feel like that term really captures the totality of all that I do as an artist and as an educator and as a scholar, right, who studies culture, is impacted by culture, makes culture. And the bottom line is that arts are essential to culture. And no one would argue whether or not culture is essential. Culture is in our very living. And so are the arts in terms of the way that we move through life and move through the world in mundane ways and in extraordinary ways, So I was really interested in thinking through how to articulate how inseparable, right, the arts are from understanding culture and how culture is from understanding the arts. So often when we travel, even from state to state, but certainly abroad, our entry point into understanding a culture that's different than our own is to look at what the artists were doing. Right, to see what people were making, to experience something that tells us about the emotional trajectory of that culture. Because, information and data can only take us so far, right? Information and data do not always guarantee understanding, and they do not always guarantee empathy, and they do not always guarantee connection, right? But arts and the opportunity, right, to have an embodied experience, so often liveness, right, that is intimate, where we are sharing a moment and get to enter as ourselves into that moment and experiencing it. That's the thing that teaches us understanding, right? That's the thing that opens our eyes to really consider experiences other than our own as a way of connecting the disconnected. So in my offering, I talk a lot about, my theory of the cultural conservatory, right, which is, the collection of our foundational experiences that contribute to creative practice, but also intuitive knowledge and the ways that we come about understanding our identity and the identity of our communities, right? And what ultimately ends up shaping the way that we engage with communities outside of our own community.
I think one of the things that characterizes the work that each of you do is that you see the arts with a kind of unambiguous eye, and you see the arts as ubiquitous in the society in which we live. You never separate the arts, I think, Jeff, from the news, which means you don't separate the arts from the activities that characterize us and move us and manage us in the world at large. And I think your sense of the theater is very similar. It's not just what goes on the stage in our communities, that's valuable and wonderful, but you see what belongs to us, our cultures, how we act our cultures out in virtually every aspect of lives.
Absolutely, and how we relate to each other. And the thing is, so often for artists, an essential part of our practice is engaging with people and engaging with community. We look to culture for inspiration, right? And then we inform culture. We report in a different way, right? As artists, back to our communities and back to our societies. It's such an awesome way to contribute to preserving the conversations and the moments that are defining our times and our generations, and to carry with us those legacies that came before us, and then to, leave a love note for the future, right? Or, a provocative question or a call for the future, in terms of ways of radically reimagining society as it could be, as we hope it will be, as we dream it will be. So there's just, not only do I not see it as that there's no separation, I really see it as a part of the living, right? It's a part of the living, as a part of the doing.
I was telling Janet earlier today that, for me, literature and art came before journalism. My interest in it, my interaction with it, and when I was, I won't go into the long story, but when I was a first sort of serious person about something, it was accidentally about the classics, about ancient Greece, of all things, and I sort of accidentally started studying ancient Greek. Now, the very things you're talking about, about our connections. How do we tell the story of who we are? How do we tell the news? I mean, we know cultures have always done that. I mean, what is Homer but, telling the story of a time and a people, right, through literature. And of course, it was an oral tradition anyway, so there was a performative aspect to that in Greek epic and in lyric poetry. So, I mean, for me, that was maybe it's not everybody's way in, but it was sort of an odd way in for me. But it certainly told me that this is part of the way that people have always explained and communicated their stories to one another.
Well, and a whole portion of the book brings together thinkers who actually communicate our histories to us through the arts. They see in the arts what it is we have been in civilizations over time throughout the world, because the artists give us those messages, those stories, those artifacts that continue over the long process of time.
But Alberta, can I ask you, I mean, you started this. Why did you call it Are the Arts Essential with a question mark?
Well, because at base, I believe that most people think the arts are ancillary to the way in which we live. I think we have been taught that there are really, really important things to think about.
Yeah.
Math, science, economics, health, and that we're taught that the arts are a luxury, a leisure time activity. This has worried me for many years, because I know that artists and art makers and art managers are more serious about the contributions that they make than that. All of this brings us, I think, to the third question, because you two, both of you, have unique perspectives about the role of arts and culture in American society and in our histories and in our understandings of ourselves, which I think you have both touched on eloquently. How would you characterize the role of arts and culture in these times, in the tumultuous times we currently live in? Is there something special about what arts and culture do for us right now? And I think we all know that we're in a tumultuous time. That word essential, by the way, was a word that we chose for the book long before it became a word of renown and a core word in our society and many others in the time of the pandemic. So essential became more essential during recent times. But the essentiality of the arts, as you have both pointed out, goes way back and forward, and was always revealed to us much about who we are and even why we are. But what about these times now?
I'm in constant thought, and I would say in constant draft about answering that question, because I so often feel that we are in a wave of a moment that feels more tumultuous than times have been of the past before. And at the same time, you know, the arc of reaching towards and aspiring towards justice and equity is so long, you know, and that's work that has been done for so long. So it's so hard for me to talk about the present moment without talking about how we have examples of how essential the arts have been to surviving difficulty, right? And I speak, you know, really specifically from the African American performance tradition and artistic tradition, where literally making art was a part of preserving culture, but also absolutely surviving it. You know, I talk about in the chapter that for people enslaved in the United States, throughout you know, all of the places where the transatlantic slave trade dispersed people, in the United States, the drumming tradition was outlawed in a way that was very, very unique from the Caribbean and from Latin America. And so one would think that, wow, this act of art making and of culture making and of pride making was stripped away. What do people do with that scarcity? And then, of course, what we know generations down the line, what I know as a recipient generations down the line, is that from that scarcity, right, or from the intended sort of robbing of culture, people made culture anew. Right, so there wasn't a drum, and so what happened was this fantastic a cappella musical tradition that we have so many traditions that descended from that to thank from, you know, to be thankful for, right? From Negro spirituals to the blues to gospel to jazz to doo-wop to hip-hop to, I mean, all of these things we can say, well, wow, there was a drum taken away, and this is what people began to do and what they began to create as a result of this absence, right? Or as a result of this scarcity, as a result of this turmoil. So what I say, and where I say that I'm in draft about that, is because I feel like we're gonna have so much information about what has been birthed out of this time and this moment of scarcity, of sort of deprivation of tumultuous time in terms of what are people creating in the absence of what we thought should be there, what could be there, what might be there. And then the other thing that I would say is just that it really is essential to quality of life and survival in so many ways. Like, there is not a direction that people can turn where they're not consuming art in one way or another. And so sometimes it's just about acknowledging the essentiality. We take it for granted because it's always around us and always, you know, sort of serving us and nurturing us. But there's so much that is making sure that we survive, that we remember, that we keep record, that we do all of these things, and that in times of turmoil, I think that's when those are also really heightened times of generative work, of people making things, of people making no way, you know, making a way out of no way, of making something from nothing.
What do you think, Jeff?
Well, I mean, I too would start, I think, by just looking to context and saying, yes, it's tumultuous times, but there have been many other tumultuous times in our history and in the history of, in human history, for sure. So I'm not sure how much I want to make, you know, specific claims for the arts for right now. But I am in the news business, and you asked the question, so I will go, you know, I mean, I want to think very specifically about things that are happening just in our own moment. The pandemic. What happened? People were isolated, people were alone, people were sick, people were dying. What happened? We saw many people turn to arts. That was no accident, of course. I mean, whether you think about, it turned out that bookstores did really well because people wanted to read. I know I did a hell of a lot of reading, and everybody I know did. People turned to music. One of the very meaningful things that I was able to do on our program during this time was a kind of project together with Yo-Yo Ma called Songs of Comfort that he created, but he put out a call to get people to send in and perform a video of a song that was meaningful to them and share it. And he built a large community, which we were able to do some stories on and kind of further that community. I mean, we all saw the videos of people singing outside and performing outside. That doesn't seem accidental at all to me. So the pandemic, something like that, that's so jarring to our very kind of humanity and communal humanity, you see the sense of what we were losing and how we might turn to the arts for that.
You know, I also feel as though the quiet the pandemic created for all of us, alongside the fight for equity that arose in the middle of that,
Mhm.
and the threat of war that could become a much larger war going on, and what seems like very close to us.
Yeah.
That all of that, in a way, has heightened not only the need for art and the reaching out for it, but even a kind of transformation in the industry, if we can call it that, the industry of the arts themselves. More
Yes.
and more people accessing the arts because they were home and the arts were online.
Mhm.
More and more people speaking to the kinds of issues that you've raised, Cristal, in particular, on the American stage and in films, capturing the moment when people are fighting for their rights. It's a very yeasty time, which makes me think that, and you sort of suggested this, that tumult provides a kind of incentive, that hardship offers an opportunity for artists, that when we have to think about, examine, explain the world we live in dangerous times, the arts become an instrument for understanding and for action. Maybe we're honored by what the arts do in times of trouble.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you made a good point about stillness, because all of the things that we're naming, don't stop happening when we're not isolated and when we are engaging. People still lean on music to get through their days, right? People still, right, on the way to work or on the way to, doing whatever, are going to be impacted by a piece of public art and take that in. But the stillness, right, alongside turmoil, has a spotlight whereby the thing that people are leaning on or leaning towards to endure, right, or to get through or to make meaning and to make sense are things that defy words, right? They're not leaning for, like let me get more, information. Folks are leaning towards, let me get more understanding, let me get more comfort, let me get more, of a way of really moving through, right, a moment and continuing, and continuing on. So I like to think about the spotlight. It's kind of like we have these lights coming at us on stage now, and if the lights are dark in the theater, then those lights shine really brightly, right? But when all of the other lights in the theater are on, those lights are still on, and they're still happening, and they're still making this experience. And so it is a gift for us in a way, you know what I mean? Like that stillness to say, well, gosh, look at how much the quality of life and the value of life and the way that I want to reach out to people and to connect to people is so important to me when, that's the thing that's really making the day-to-day bearable.
Well, and we also see the arts contributing or being thought of and thought through in different ways. I'm struck by the essay by Jesse Rosen and the head, Dan Weiss, the head of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, talking about how major cultural institutions, which have largely existed in their own right and on their own merits, are now talking about how they can reach more people, how they can address the needs of their communities, how they can be more resourceful in reaching out. And much the same thing is happening in major foundations, as we know.
In major journalistic institutions, absolutely. No, I'm glad you went there, because I think this is the tumult that is a very important and interesting one right now I think you used the word industry, so the arts industry or the cultural industry, around social justice, around, questions of how can the art be used and focused around important issues, but also the institutions themselves. And we see so much questioning at places, whether it's the Metropolitan Museum, you know, the most important art museums, down to the community neighborhood places, thinking about these issues, like what is it that we're doing and who are we doing it for? You know, who are we serving? And therefore, what kind of art should we be presenting? Or if you're the artist, what kind of art might I be thinking about making? Does it change what I do? These are things that are kind of in one way always there, but boy, are they there now, you know, and we don't know how this is going to play out. I mean, I just in my work, I'm dealing with arts organizations and, you know, watching them, reporting on them, and all the time, and you just see that this is tumult is the right word, you know, whether it's leadership, whether it's programming, exhibitions, at every possible audiences, of course, you know, who is our audience? How do we how do we broaden that audience? Who do we do this for? These are hugely important questions, and that are really strongly affecting the arts world today.
Many American orchestras in the time of tumult realized they couldn't build their halls. It wasn't right, it wasn't safe. And they began to work in smaller groups, in smaller settings. One major orchestra has decided that it's going to go into different communities around its major urban center with music, taking the music to people. The Public Theater in New York is one of many theaters that's doing the same thing with its work, taking it to the people and bringing people that have not usually experienced the work in their theater to it. It's so I haven't really thought about this way and looked at a question like this in quite this way, but I think we've made an interesting discovery about what the arts do when the arts are needed.
Yeah, and then of course our other answer to that is that they're always needed. And they're always needed. I mean, and because I think what's really coming up for me as we continue to talk about this is the loop, the call and response between the arts shaping culture and culture shaping the arts. Because institutions and things like that, they're thinking about, in some ways, relevance, right? How are we relevant, right? Or how are we increasing accessibility, right? And in doing those things, it's about being able to respond to and or connect to the conversations and the movement, right, of the times. What is the art that is reflecting what's happening now? What is the art that's responding to, or that's capturing this moment? And then artists doing the same thing, right? What is it that I am making that is contributing to, right, or capturing this moment? And so that there's this constant loop, and the power of the arts to really contribute in social and cultural change, right? In this moment, and the things that artists are making and the things that artists are doing, there are institutions that may not have been as interested in accessibility before, right? But in the call for justice, in the call for equity, in the call for access, then it's thinking, oh, well, then how do we change that? So that there is an emergence coming out of this moment that says, well, if there's a new standard for accessibility, if there's a new standard for representation, right, how are we living up to that call that's coming from the culture, that is coming as in response to the art that people are making, whether they're getting funded or not, right? The dream is that they get funded, but whether people get funded or not, artists still keep making art.
Well, it begins to sound as though the question we should ask is, how is tumult changing the arts? Because the arts can help us survive what we've called here the tumult. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, before I answer that, I wanted to keep this going about the tumult, the tumult itself, because you also raised Ukraine. I mean, think about, because this sort of goes to our role of the arts too. I mean, think about what's happening there. Are people writing poems now? No, well, they will later on. But what's being targeted often and destroyed? Cultural institutions, you know, in many cases. That's not an accident, you know, having looked at wars in many different situations, when culture is often targeted. And why? Because it's part of the identity of people and part of what they value. And, you know, it's clearly understood that if those things are destroyed, that's a different way of destroying a nation or a culture or a people. So, you know, it's on my mind because it's been a focus of the last couple of months for me in coverage of Ukraine's cultural heritage. And I remember early on talking to a museum director over there, and he said, I'm calling this a heritage war. Heritage defined as culture, language, you know, identity. The Russians want to end Ukraine. What is Ukraine? Well, if not our language and our buildings and all that we have created, including our culture and the arts. So it's not a new idea. That one goes back to, as long as there's been war and fighting, that one goes back too. But it's a way of understanding another answer to are the arts essential? Well, yeah, everybody can see how essential they are because look what the targets are. I must say, I mean, I think I wrote about this as I was saying that. I remembered writing about this in the essay. You know, one of the low moments for me as an American of the past years was when our president at the time, Donald Trump, said something about destroying things in Iraq. He said it was okay to target those things because those were, you know, I think it was Iraq. I should have all my facts right, so forgive me if I don't remember exactly the target. But he said it in a way that was wrong, you know, because he acted as though that's their culture, and we can, if we're fighting them, we can destroy it. Well, there's reasons why there's international law to protect cultural property, because it's all of ours. You know, it's all of ours. It's not just Iraq's. It's like if that's why we want our culture protected, because it's humanities, you know. There's a reason why you guys were talking about Shakespeare earlier today. Shakespeare isn't just, you know, England of the, whatever, 6th, 17th century. Shakespeare belongs to everybody, right? All, past and present, all over the world. So that's why these things are important to be protected.
In bad times, we learn or relearn how much significance is achieved, how much history is remembered, how much action is actually stimulated by the people who are artists and the people who attend to them.
I just want to say one last thought, because we are talking about the arts as, you know, survival and endurance and all of these things, but the arts and artists are also a part of the solution, right? The things that artists do and create, and those creative minds, you know, to solve the socio-cultural tumult of our time, we need creativity. We need folks who can imagine a new way forward and think about a new way forward and manifest it, right, in all of these ways. And so I want to say that it is also, and this was, you know, when I was talking about speaking in draft, that is to that point, right, that it's also about the power that artists have to generate something from nothing, to make something anew, to think about new policy, to think about new ways of bringing people together. I think about things like making sure artists are a part of all of our systems, right? That to have that kind of mind in the space that is accustomed to thinking about things in imaginative ways, in ways that haven't been realized yet. Like, that's also a part of the essentiality. You know, how do we rebuild, and how do we, you know, kind of respect the contribution of a range of traditions and ideas and cultures and all of these ways. So I just want to make sure to leave on that note that it is not only that arts are keeping record or that arts are making our lives bearable, but that arts are also mapping a way forward, and that we're also they also invite us to think about new possibilities in a way that I don't know if anything else does.
We're talking about creativity. And I think our time is up. I hate to end this conversation, but we must, definitely. Is that the case?
And what a note to end it on, with creativity and hope and arts taking us into the future. Thank you, Alberta, Cristal, Jeff.
Okay.
Thank you all for being here, for hearing us, and I think, I hope, I will say, sharing our view that the arts are essential. Thank you.
Thank you.